Hello once again and welcome to Herd Immunity News. I'm Marcus Botza. Today it gives me great pleasure to welcome back on to the show Mr. Ben Habib. Ben is a political stalwart in this country. He is a former MEP with the Brexit Party and he's someone that is always worth listening to. He is a champion of national sovereignty for us all, but we're going to get his views on so many things that are going on in the country right now. But first of all, let me just say, Ben Habib, how are you, sir?
I'm very well indeed, thank you, Mark. How are you?
Well, I put a face on it and say that I'm well, but obviously, like millions of us in this country, we're very, very concerned
Yeah,
to breaking point about what's going on in this country under the Keir Starmer regime. Now, before we get on to the other subjects such as conflict of interest, members' interests themselves, donations here, photographers, wives' trips to Rome, but £14,000 birthday parties, Lord Wahid Ali. Let's just talk about immigration. Now, immigration is something that you've been on top of for your entire political career. Right now, we're looking at the same numbers that we had in 2020, 2023. After Starmer's 8 weeks in power, it seems like 8 years. We're looking at a trajectory going up, though, because we're accepting more and more people at pace. What can the opposition do, if anything, to try and put as much heat under Starmer to reverse this trend?
the opposition being the technical opposition in Parliament, of which there really isn't any, or do you mean the people like you and me and those of us in
Well,
this country who
okay,
want us?
let's
Yeah,
go first to parliamentary sovereignty and then to national sovereignty.
yeah. So, I mean, I don't think the Conservative Party is going to do anything about it. We've got to remember that it was really under the Conservative Party in the last 3 years that we've had 3 million people come to this country. I think actually in just over 2 years. So 3 years, probably we're looking at 3.5. I know over 5 years, we've had
Mm.
5 million people come to this country. 5 million. Some have obviously left, but
Yeah.
that's a huge, huge number coming in. And, those leaving often
Mm.
aren't those who came in. So
Mm.
what we're seeing is a dramatic changing in the demographic makeup of this country. And as Suella Braverman said so eloquently before she was sacked by Rishi Sunak, we've had more migration to the United Kingdom in the last 25 years than in all of history before that. And there's a rate at which a country can tolerate new cultures coming to it, maintain its own culture, maintain its own equilibrium, if you like, while absorbing new ideas from outside, new cultural habits, and so on, and somehow evolving in a homogeneous, harmonious way. But we're way over that. We're way over it. And indeed, as you know, and we've discussed before, we have a regulatory and legislative framework which doesn't even seek to integrate. It doesn't seek to protect that which is traditionally British and which you and I might associate as being British. It seeks to celebrate, protect, and promote cultures which are foreign. And we've got trapped. We've got trapped. I think if I can so I'm just going to digress for a second. I think
Please.
the conflict that we're having, the intellectual conflict, if this is where the root
Mm.
cause is, we're having, is in the belief that we have a liberal democracy.
Mm.
And liberalism, whilst at a very fundamental level, is consistent with democracy because you've got to allow people the freedom of choice, independent will, and so on. When you take liberalism to the extent to which we've taken it, basically saying that every individual has the right to do whatever the hell they wish to do because that is their inalienable right,
Mm.
and they can identify, for example, as a dog, and we can't query them on it because that is their liberal right, you then actually undermine democracy because democracy is ruled by the people. And by definition, it's what's in the majority's interests. And it's a collective, it's not the individual. So liberal democracy works when liberalism is in check. But liberal democracy, the way we're practicing it, has got to the point where liberalism has actually set aside democracy.
Mm.
And we're seeing this. We're seeing, as I mentioned, the championing of foreign cultures, foreign religions. sexual preferences, self-identification as whatever you wish to be, pronouns, all that kind of nonsense. All of that is being given protected characteristics. And we're seeing the majority being shunned aside, and those of us who wish to stand up to any of that being categorized as far right and therefore castigated into a corner, and out of which we should never come and not express our opinion because we're somehow pariahs within society. And that is a dumbing down of democracy in the most fundamental, basic way, because we're not being allowed to stand up for the majority. And of course, if you take it one step on and you look at what they're doing constitutionally, they're actually embedding all of this constitutionally as well. So I mentioned the regulatory and legislative framework for the protection of these, minority interests. But it goes beyond that. We have given legislative protection to the Bank of England, to the Office of Budget. We're about to give it to the Office of Budget Responsibility. We've given it to the Electoral Commission, to Ofcom, and all these bodies that have come to be put in place to protect liberalism, in effect, to protect that which the ruling elite regard as the liberal way forward. And in the process of this protection of liberalism, they're destroying democracy, because none of our institutions are accountable. Our regulations go against the majority interest. And you see the point I'm making?
Absolutely.
We've got to a point where, the ridiculous thing here is it was liberalism, it was democratic liberalism, which gave right to equal rights for women, which offered up equal rights for women. It was that campaign. And now what we're seeing with the ever increasing move towards liberalism is actually women's rights being diminished. Yeah. So it would have been anathema to any free-minded individual to see women on the streets wearing burqas. I see women on the streets wearing burqas every day, many, many of them. And that is the hiding away of a woman. Mm-hmm. But because of our liberal regulatory framework and the mindset now and the culture, we're giving that kind of culture a protected status, and we mustn't challenge women in a burqa. And then, of course, you've got the whole trans ideology thing going on, where men can now identify as women and effectively assault them in their own loos and on the sports field, etc. So I think we've become a really topsy-turvy society. And if you go back over history, Mark, bear with me 1 second, I'll shut up in a second.
Of course, sir.
If you go back over history and you look at where societies have ceased to think straight, the way we're now, in my opinion, ceasing to think straight, it's basically end of civilization stuff.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's quite sobering that you would put it in that fashion. But when we put out to make your point about this, how can you unite a country when you're pushing diversity? How can you absolutely have ESG, DEI diktats that want to fractionalize society intentionally through the threats of even closing down your business, as we saw during the Farage NatWest Coutts exposure to maybe 400,000. It wasn't just Nigel. There were 400,000 people who were identified as politically exposed. And to make your point and add some force to it, we have to look at a tweet that we put out in relation to the safety of our own women and girls, where we're looking at the Rochdale rape gang's ringleader, Kuari Abdul Raf, had his deportation back to Pakistan was refused and held back because of the 1922 National Borders Act, which said that his own personal safety and security would be at risk. This has happened to the Eritrean sex offenders as well. One chap was stopped after being a sex offender in this country, stopped being deported by our Home Office because he was fearful of being conscripted into the army. So you cannot defend those positions where our own children now have to be put in harm's way to satisfy some skewer international laws and regulations, which we have ignored in the past. 2014, for example, David Cameron ignored the prisoners' voting rights. So this I think is just being used as a really flimsy pretext to globalism and totalitarian rule, which I think you're touching on.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, when you dumb down democracy, you're increasing the propensity for totalitarianism, and we're heading into a very controlled society. You know, we've seen people released from jail when they've. There was one guy had 109 convictions for assault, released from jail, and at the same time, people are being jailed for tweeting stuff because they're upset about immigration. You know, and the whole thing is crazy. And of course, I mean, I painted my initial discussion in the context of liberal democracy and how liberalism was damaging democracy. But you're quite right to bring up globalism. And, you know, the other big elephant in the room is globalism. It's not just a unitary issue, liberal democracy eating itself up. It's that we have a political class that doesn't actually believe in the democratic unit that is the United Kingdom. It believes in some kind of greater global prosperity, greater global good. And the minute you pivot to that belief, because you think it's all about global prosperity, you turn your back on the United Kingdom. It's impossible to be an internationalist and a globalist and claim you're British and pro-British. They absolutely abut each other. So I've come to I've taken to saying Keir Starmer is anti-British because he wants to give up authority to foreign powers. He wishes to take down our borders, and he'd give up our currency for the euro. I can't class anyone who would wish to do those three things as being pro-British. It's in opposite directions.
Indeed. And we're talking about parliamentary opposition. Obviously, there are 5 Reform MPs in there that are doing their bit. One can say that they're possibly the custodians of national sovereignty. We'd include you in that discussion as well. Now, whether people like reform, they don't like reform, they still are the loudest voices we would put to you in Parliament, because the Conservatives that you wish to obliterate, though we do want to get your views on. You chimed in on the leadership election, so you must still want them on side as much as possible. Obviously, your chosen person, your favourite was Ms. Pradeep Patel, who you know.
She fell at the first hurdle.
She fell at the first hurdle, yeah. So you better be careful who you back next time. As far as the right wing are concerned, Mr. Jenrick, a former Europhile himself, seems to have now had some sort of Damoclesian, Pansean, sort of eureka moment, and he's come on board. What are your views on the Tories, just quickly, please?
Yeah, so I mean, the Tory party is a fundamentally broken party. It is ideologically just undermined by its own inability to get it's got no ideology. But the reason I took an interest in the Tory leadership campaign is because they are the official opposition. They will get a lot more airtime than any Reform MP will. There will be the leader of the opposition at the dispatch box posing questions to Keir Starmer every Wednesday. And you want the strongest possible voice at that dispatch box, making the arguments that you and I believe in. They're not going to govern the Conservative Party. That's not happening. But you want a strong voice. And some people misinterpreted, why is Ben going all Tory? I wasn't going Tory. Sure. I wanted a Brexiteer at the dispatch box. And when you look at the 6 candidates, I didn't believe in the Brexit credentials of any of them, with the exception of Priti. And of course, Priti opened up the borders under, when she was Home Secretary, and there's a lot of criticism that can be leveled at Priti. But of the 6 candidates, she was by far the closest thing to what you and I think, would want at the dispatch box. Jenrick, I don't think is honest. He said the other day we should arrest people saying Allahu Akbar. I mean, he's gone from the sublime to the ridiculous. He was here basically voting Remain, backing every one of Theresa May's withdrawal agreements, all of which would have undermined Brexit, sitting like a pathetic little limp character, adolescent child in Boris Johnson's government, not saying peeky boo to anything. And now he shaved his hair back, trying to look a bit like Tommy Robinson, saying ditch the ECHR and arrest anyone who says Allahu Akbar. And did he say he was on for mass deportations the other day? I can't remember. I mean, he's painting himself in some kind of I'm a right winger. Oh, he said, I tell you what he said, which really got me laughing, was he said, I'm radical. Now, anyone who no one thinks of themselves as radical. People may look at me and you and say they're a bit radical, but I don't think of myself as radical. The minute you say I'm radical, that means you don't believe what you're saying. He wants to appear to be radical.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think it's really, they are a busted flush, and we are happy to see their demise. And it looks like Rishi Sunak's been absolutely nowhere. If they were serious about it, wouldn't they have moved on to try and combat the totalitarian rule that Starmer is putting up? I mean, we've got a budget coming up at the end of the month, and people are fleeing the country in their droves, Ben, to get out of here. Well, I mean, just on the budget, what are your predictions for Rachel Thieves and her budget?
Rachel Thieves, that's brilliant.
Sorry, Reeves. Sorry, I misread that.
Well, one thing
hostages. Sorry.
One bit of advice you'd think by her age she'd know is that if you're going to fleece someone, don't give them 2 months' notice, because they might just get the hell out, and the prediction becomes the reality. And we are seeing, I think, 9,500 millionaires have left the country this year versus 4,200 last year. And, we're taking in lots of unskilled, benefit-seeking, illegal migrants who claim pose a threat to our civil society at one level. And at another level, we're giving every motivation and reason for those who contribute intellectually and economically and culturally to this country to leave. I mean, you just couldn't make this up,
The trajectory is awful, really, for more borrowing. I mean, we gave 11 billion to the Africans to help them stop the
climate change.
We gave 5 billion to Ukraine for life, but into unknown bank accounts as well, no matter how much goodwill you've got toward Ukrainians and their special operations, because it is not a war. Let's be clear, there's no war being declared between these two, so the Geneva Convention does not stand its water, hold its water.
Is that right? I didn't know that. There's no official war.
Yeah, it's a special operation. There is no war being declared between the two. So, okay, billions off to wind farms, wind tunnels, the Ed Miliband's running around like a crazed man playing his little ukulele. All of these experts have been debunked again. Chris Whitty's been put in charge, Ben. I mean, he's meant to be a medical expert, but look, this whole mess is right in front of our eyes. Now, reform obviously play a big part of that. They are getting a lot of airtime on social media, which seems to be the new normal. Obviously, we want to talk to you about reform because you have put up, in our estimation, quite rightly, a very good case to say, let's democratise. So can you just give our viewers and listeners an overview, please, as to where you sit with reform and where their democratisation is going?
Okay, so the democratisation of reform was a critical prerequisite, actually, for me to join reform. And I had said the party is a limited company with 15 shares. I don't think it actually changed it yet. A limited company with 15 shares, 9 of which are owned by Nigel Farage, 5 by Richard Tice, and 1 by a guy called Mehtash Azami, who's their treasurer. And when Richard was pressing me to join reform in February 2023, I said I'll only join if Nigel gives up his shares, and any number of ways you can democratize the party, but I want him not to have a controlling interest. You can't have one man controlling a political party. It's got to be run on a consensual basis. And Nigel refused to give up his shares. And in the end, I got a letter from Richard, which was perhaps naive of me to believe that a letter would be sufficient. But I got a letter from Richard, which said that the party would be run in a consensual way. We would not stand down against the Tories. There'd be no deals with the Tories. Because of, I was fearful about the 317 candidates that Nigel stood down in 2019, and that we would continue to fight for Brexit and for Northern Ireland because, the withdrawal agreement had partitioned the country. And I don't believe Brexit's done. Nigel does say Brexit is done. I disagree with Nigel. And so I wanted it in the letter that Brexit's not done. We've got to fight for Brexit. And by the way, delivering Brexit is a prerequisite for all the freedoms that you and I want. We won't be able to debug any of the problems you and I have been discussing unless you first get Brexit. That's a prerequisite. And I won't bore you with all the reasons why, but so it's a critical necessity. And then when Nigel came back, obviously this year as leader, that letter no longer stood. And he came back on the 3rd of June in the middle of an election campaign. And I would have kicked up a bit of a fuss about democratization then, except it was an election campaign. And, I didn't want to undermine our electoral chances. But I did raise the subject immediately with Richard and said, as soon as this election's over, we got to democratize. And then in the last week of the election, before the election result came out, I made a speech in Wellingborough saying, right, okay, once this election is done, I made the speech on Monday, the election was on Thursday, we got to democratize. And Nigel on the Friday declared he was going to democratize, and he talked about branch structures and so on. But it didn't really address the point I was interested in, which was the nerve center of the party, Nigel giving up control of it. So I wrote an article on the 14th of July, setting out what I think needed to be done. And I don't think it was particularly well received, but, I pleaded a lot in private, and there's nothing like public pressure to actually get a result. And then I went on campaigning for the democratization of it. And just very plainly, you can't have a government, you can't have any serious political party controlled by one guy. I hope that's self-evident. I don't need to justify that. I hope for listeners that's self-evident. And on the 22nd of August this year, Zia Yusuf on GB News declared to Christopher Hope that he had the finest legal minds working on a constitution day and night, and that it would give the members the right to remove the leader. And then 2 days before the conference, a document was released, and I began to read it thinking, I hope this delivers what Zia promised. And it looked strangely familiar. And it was a draft constitution that Richard Tice had given me back in February 2023 with a few tweaks. So it wasn't the finest legal minds working on it. It was a rubbish document in 2023. It was cut and paste, and it doesn't work. It doesn't democratize it. I mean, the hurdles required to give effect to change is just so high, they're undeliverable. And people interpret this as me wanting to get rid of Nigel. Nigel and I do have ideological differences, such as Brexit being done or not being done. Sure. That's a pretty fundamental difference. But it's not about Nigel. It's about making sure that the party is true to itself and true to the movement it's created. This has got to be bigger than one person. And the best way to keep leadership honest is to make sure leadership understands that if it doesn't do what it promises, it will be removed. You need that tension. And anyway, so it was deeply disappointing to me that the document that Zia Yusuf produced, that Reform produced, doesn't do what it says on the tin. And of course, it was marched through at the conference very quickly. And that is now, I don't think they've actually implemented the constitution, but it has now been approved.
Yeah, and looking from Nigel's point of view, obviously he's had some very unpleasant experiences with UKIP, where he fell out completely with the NEC.
Yeah.
And I think he does not want to go back to that model, but at the same time, he must democratise the party if he's hoping to become, as what he's claimed to be, the Prime Minister in 2029. That's the goal. That's Nigel's stated goal. Obviously, Absolutely. They'd be really happy with over 100 MPs. It's something like that, or to become the opposition. But while we take on board completely, you haven't done this to replace Nigel. Nigel's still the vanguard. Nigel's still the man who everybody rallies around. He's the most recognisable Brexiteer in the world. But I would say yourself and him together was a fantastic 1-2 punch, with others like Mr. Anderson, Richard Tice doing his bit, and others involved, Mr. Rupert Lowe. All of those characters were, and Widdicombe on the peripheries, there was a sort of united force. I think what people are unjustly saying about yourself is that this is an attempt for you to try and up your influence in political life, whereas I don't see it like that personally. What do you say?
I'm 59. I mean, just very clearly, I'm 59 years old. I actually don't want to be in politics. I really don't want to be in politics. I know a lot of people say that. I really don't. I only got drawn into it in 2019 because of the hash Theresa May was making of Brexit. I only stayed in it because of the old-fashioned notion that having fought for it, having fought for Brexit, I better stay the distance. I didn't, and this is an ideological difference between Nigel and me. Nigel claimed Brexit was done in 2020 and vacated the battlefield, and I said no, it's not done, and I stayed to fight for Northern Ireland and for fishing and getting rid of net zero, etc. And the minute the job is done, if the United Kingdom is saved and we get rid of this liberalism that's undermining democracy, we get back to ruling the United Kingdom and not trying to govern for global betterment. And we re-energize our democracy by getting rid of these quangos and international law and international institutions, I'll be gone. But I suspect, given the conditions of my leaving, I'll be here for a very long time, because it doesn't seem like any of those goals are going to be achieved anytime soon. But it's not about me. It's really not about me, Mark. I swear it's not about me.
Oh, absolutely. No, you've really sacrificed it all for your principles. That's our view. And people can make up their own minds. If they really look into the detail of what you were trying to say, it was a long-term ambition rather than a short-term fix. So where do you sit with reform now? Are you in reform, Ben?
So Nigel declared on Channel 4 on Friday last week that Ben Habib is not even a member of Reform.
Right.
And I haven't resigned as a member. I may, of course, not be a member. But if I wasn't a member, then I was deputy leader and not a member. I certainly haven't resigned as a member since I was sacked as deputy leader. So I don't know where I am with Reform, but it would appear that I'm not a member.
It would. I mean, he publicly came out and said that, and I sort of nearly choked on my coffee at the time when I was watching it. But it is very messy, and it's something I think that they really should have a resolve one way or another, because it doesn't look good.
No, it's not ideal.
It's not ideal, but this happens in every single political party, and it always seems that those, I mean, ideological differences, we'll put this to you. Nigel Farage was speaking during one of his many interviews online. Stephen was interviewing him, I believe, from
Edgington
News. Yeah. And he said that he doesn't want to talk about deportations. He's not interested in this at all. He doesn't want to be dragged into this conversation. Now, this is news to a lot of people, and it's horrifying when we have President Trump, a great friend of his, talking about millions of people being deported gradually through the years, and also under Blair. This is in the news. This is in the news doing the rounds, that Blair was deporting under Blunkett when he was the Home Secretary. He was deporting about 40,000 people a year maximum. What are your views on deportation, Ben, in the United States?
I think anyone in this country illegally should be deported immediately. Anyone who enters this country illegally should not have any right to stay here whatsoever. There's no right to stay. Obviously, if you're here legally, then that's a different matter. But the other thing that Nigel said, which was quite interesting to me, was that he wasn't concerned about the demographic changes in society. He was more interested in the way that society integrates. And I completely agree that integration is crucial. But integration becomes impossible if you have far too many people coming into the country, every year. And we can't, no matter what you do towards integration, you can't cope if you're overwhelmed. And I think that point needs to be made.
So we've got 180,000 people approximately being housed at the moment. We've got 10,000 coming over, we believe, from the Lebanon under Starmer's instructions to the Royal Navy. So you're talking at 200,000 people that are here, that have come here illegally. Now, we took it that it would be a sensible approach to start taking these people back.
Why do you say start, Mark? I just say in an ideal world, they should all go back right now. Not start taking them. They should all go back right now. Why are they here? Why has our government allowed elements into our society across our border about whom we know nothing and given them free run of our society to assault if necessary and to exploit, but possibly assault our society? It makes no sense to me. If you enter this country illegally, you should be detained, you should be put behind bars, and you should be put on the first plane back to wherever it is you came from. And if we haven't got a deportation arrangement with them, you stay behind bars.
Indeed, I mean, we're bringing we can bring 10,000 people out off the Lebanon at whim, at the click of our fingers. We've got 700 Royal Navy personnel on standby to evacuate 10,000 people. So if you can take 10,000 people out in a couple of days, surely to God, you can actually start to take people back to France or where the last port of call. And we keep hearing all this nonsense from the human rights lawyers that they've got the right to settle wherever they bloody want. Well, surely to goodness, that depends on what the host can do. We've no capacity, etc., etc. But we just get your views. Your views are clear and they're well documented. But for the time we've got left, please, Ben, we'd like your views on Labour, the Labour Party, and conflict of interest. Now, the donor that's really in the news right now is Lord Wahim Ali, the multimedia guru. Now, Lord Ali owns a company called Executive Pipeline. Don't know if you've heard about this company, but they specialise in ESG, DEI diktats.
Well, that's a surprise.
There's a surprise. That's the last thing you would expect from a
well, good bit of I should have checked that out, Mark. Well, I'm impressed.
Well, thank you, dear boy. We do attempt to a little journalism now and again.
But that's a really crucial link you've made. It's a really crucial link.
Well, let's go a bit further. Let me share with you some of the customers of Executive Pipeline. Executive Pipeline offered diversity training and grounds to HM Government, NatWest, the BBC, the Home Office, Marks and Spencer's, Aviva, Bupa, a certain bank that I won't mention because I'm a customer of theirs, British Gas, Direct Line Group, Jaguar, Land Rover, the Home Office, and others. It goes on and on. So government departments are paying money for consultation on ESG DEI to Lord Ali, who sits on the board of, this is just one company of the 8 that he sits on the board. This is all in Companies House. People can go and have a look. The Ministry of Justice, for example, Border Force are another customer. You know, and let's just look at the definition, just temporarily, if you allow me, Ben. We really invited you on to get your opinions. But when we look at the definition, the guidelines on members' private interests clearly state that neutrality for ministers is essential. No minister should accept gifts or hospitality from any person or organisation where a conflict of interest could arise. A list of gifts and how they were dealt with on an individual basis is published annually. So it's conflict of interest on the table with Lord Ali with what I've told you.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a brilliant joining of the dots that you've done. I mean, I had assumed that Lord Ali had some vested interest, but his vested interest is in precisely the area that you and I are particularly concerned about and have been in this conversation. I mean, it's horrendous, isn't it, that he's buying Mrs. Starmer clothes? I mean, I joke a bit when I've been asked about this before, saying that if any man bought my wife clothes, I'd be asking my wife a few questions about what the hell's going on, right? I suppose Lord Ali's gay, so it doesn't apply, but you know the point I'm making.
Should be okay.
There's something, it should be okay, but there's something not quite right here. Yeah.
Well, it just gets deeper and darker when we see, you know, £14,000 for a birthday party, for a 40th birthday party, has been in the national interest. Tickets to Taylor Swift concerts. We had the Labour MP was on, Darren Jones, on television today saying he took a £3,500 bung because he wanted to give his children a little treat. He could have taken them to KFC, a McDonald's, 50 quid.
I mean, they've all got their noses in the trough, haven't they? They just can't resist it. And Ed Miliband, by the way, one bit of information to add to your tally is that Ed Miliband was personally donated £100,000 by Green Finance. I've got to get the name right. Green Finance Initiative Limited or something last year. And now he's a complete nutcase on net zero. So, you know.
you couldn't make this stuff up. I mean, Dale Vince is another one who pops up on GB News quite a lot. He also comes on to Mike Graham's show. Mike, a friend of yours and a dear friend of ours, who had his phone stolen recently in London, which is pretty disgusting. We don't have time to talk about that today, but looking at the green side in the investments, there's an investor who gave Labour Party £5 million and didn't care where the money went, didn't care who got it, didn't care what happened with it. I mean, they're really off the scale when it comes to alleged corruption, aren't they?
And this guy produces something called green gas. Have you heard of this?
Yes.
I mean, so, he gets grass, burns it or whatever, produces gas, or he treats it with, I think, alcohol or formaldehyde or something, produces some form of gas. And because it's come from grass which he can regrow, he calls it green. But excuse me, that's how all fossil fuels are generated. They come from something originally that contains carbon. you do some treatment to it, and then you use it, right? I mean,
I mean, I live not far from an oil refinery, Grangemouth. It's been in the
yeah,
news recently. It's being closed. It's being culled. It's going to be reduced to little more than a depot, Ben. So we're going to be buying in just on the brink of war when our shipping lanes are facing being torpedoed potentially. On the brink of war, we're sort of destroying ourselves from within. I mean, just the last few couple of minutes, what are your plans moving forward, sir? Because we're a great admirer of yours, a fan of your work. What are your plans for the next year or so, as far as a sort of voice or political influence is concerned?
yeah. So, I mean, I will be supporting reform as much as I can, and that support may not always be welcome, but they will have my support nevertheless. And whether or not I'm a member, I will be supporting them. And I will be having a watchful eye. In many respects, the case that I used to make for the United Kingdom now rests on reform's shoulders, and it's important that I make sure reform makes that case. But of course, if they're not quite making the case, I might assist them in, how they could perhaps expose it in a different way, or in a way that I would prefer. And I will go on making the arguments for all the things that I stand for, which is a proud and effectively sums up as a proud, independent, sovereign, prosperous United Kingdom. That's what I aim for. I'm got a few speeches coming up. I'm at the Oxford Union on the 24th of October. If you've got nothing better to do, you can get tickets. Yes. I'm at the Durham Union on the 25th of October, the next day. I'm speaking at a few other, sort of centre-right, what they call centre-right. I call them nationist gatherings. Yes. I don't think of myself as right wing, by the way. Some people might think I am far right, but I'm not. I'm just a nationalist. And so I'll keep campaigning, keep reform honest, keep swinging the bat, make the case for the things that I believe in, and hopefully get some traction.
Absolutely. Well, you're always welcome onto Herd Immunity News. And thank you very much for giving your time. We know you're a busy man, but we know you also believe in social media. You believe in these platforms, as you can see the trajectory as well of what's going on. We're not Ofcom regulated yet. Yvette Cooper hasn't got her clutches into us.
They may skip Ofcom regulation and just shut it all down.
Well, that's liberalism. I thought that's
it
what
is
they
liberalism.
wanted.
Yeah, they don't want anyone challenging them. Yeah.
Well, listen, always great to have you on, sir. And we will follow you very closely. We always retweet your information that's out there. We recommend anybody watching this interview today, please go on to follow Ben and his work on his Twitter site. Engage with him politely, of course, as much as possible. And all that remains for me to do today is to say, Mr. Ben Habib, thank you very much for appearing on Herd Immunity News.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for having me on.